Jake Morrison walked into the big lecture hall on Kepler 7 space station and looked around at all the strange beings sitting in their special chairs. The room was full of soft sounds that came from dozens of different alien species talking to each other before class started. Some made clicking noises while others hummed or made crystal-like ringing sounds that his translator turned into words he could understand. He found his human-sized chair and sat down next to a tall blue creature named Lyra, who seemed to glow from inside her see-through skin. On his other side sat Thek, a big rock-like being who talked by making music-like vibrations that tickled Jake's ears when the translator changed them into whispers. Behind him, some bug-like students with big eyes and sharp mouth parts were making sounds that his briefing materials had told him meant they were laughing about something. Jake had been studying at this university for 6 months now, and he still felt amazed every day. He was one of only 3 humans in the whole place, which had over 10,000 students from all across the known galaxy. Most days he felt like he was the weird one, but he loved learning about all these different species and their homeworlds. The professor walked into the room with slow, careful steps. Professor Zethkar was from a species called Saurians, who looked like the lizards from Earth but much bigger and smarter. His green scales changed color depending on his mood, and Jake had learned that when they turned brown like they were doing now, it meant the professor was getting ready to teach. Professor Zethkar had been teaching at the university longer than Jake had been alive. He was known across the galaxy as one of the best teachers of xenobiology, which was the study of life forms from different planets. Jake really enjoyed his classes because the professor made even the hardest topics easy to understand. The professor reached his speaking platform and looked out at all his students with his yellow eyes. His forked tongue came out for just a second to taste the air, which Jake knew was normal for his species. The room got quiet as everyone prepared for the lesson to begin. "Welcome, students, to Advanced Xenobiology," Professor Zethkar said in his deep voice that carried easily through the large room. "Today we will talk about how different pressures in nature cause species to change and survive on different types of planets." Jake turned on his holographic note-taking system and got ready to learn. Even though he had studied biology on Earth, learning about life from other worlds was completely different and much more interesting. Every class taught him something that amazed him about how life could exist in so many different ways. The blue student next to him, Lyra, was from a planet called Etheria, where everything was peaceful and beautiful. That came from a world of living rock formations where his people grew from the mountains themselves. The bug-like Cethra students behind him were from a planet covered in giant forests where they lived in massive tree cities. "Let us start with a simple question to see what you already know," the professor continued, as his scales stayed that calm brown color. "I want each of you to think about your home world and its history. Can anyone tell me the name of an extinct species from their planet?" Jake watched as the professor's yellow eyes moved around the room, waiting for someone to raise their hand or make whatever gesture their species used to show they wanted to speak. But something strange happened instead. The room stayed completely quiet. Not the good kind of quiet when students were thinking hard, but the confused kind of quiet when nobody understood what they were being asked. After what felt like a very long time, Lyra raised her graceful hand that glowed softly blue. "Professor, I am not sure I understand your question. On Etheria, our records show that life has always grown and changed slowly over millions of years. But extinction? I do not know this word in the way you are using it." More students began to make agreement sounds in their own languages. Thek's musical voice joined in. "The Corvan homeworld also shows life changing over time, but no species have ever disappeared completely." Other students around the room began to nod or make whatever movements their species used to show they agreed. The insectoid students clicked their mouth parts in a way that meant they were confused. The crystal beings made ringing sounds that showed they were puzzled. Professor Zethkar's scales began to change from brown to a yellow-green color that Jake had learned meant the professor was surprised and a little worried. "Surely some of you have examples of life forms that once lived on your worlds but do not exist anymore?" The quiet lasted even longer this time. Jake could feel many eyes turning to look at him, which often happened when the class discussed something that seemed normal to everyone else, but strange to him. Being human in a galaxy full of aliens meant he was usually the one who was different. Jake slowly raised his hand, feeling like he was about to say something that would make everyone look at him in that special way they did when he mentioned something from Earth that seemed impossible to them. "Yes, Mr. Morrison?" Professor Zethkar asked, and his voice sounded relieved that finally someone had an answer. Jake cleared his throat and looked around at all the alien faces watching him. "Well, Professor, that is kind of a hard question for a human to answer." The professor's scales flickered with different colors, which Jake knew meant he was very interested. "How is it hard, Mr. Morrison? Surely your species keeps records of your planet's history of life." Jake shifted in his chair, starting to feel uncomfortable as he realized that what seemed normal to him might be completely shocking to everyone else in the room. "We do keep records, sir. It is just that, well, where would you like me to start? Earth has had 5 major extinction events where most life died, plus many smaller ones. I could literally name thousands of extinct species if you want me to." The silence that followed felt completely different from the confused quiet from before. Now Jake could feel surprise, worry, and something that might have been fear coming from his classmates. Lyra's soft glow got dimmer, and Thek's musical sounds changed to notes that Jake's cultural training had taught him meant distress or alarm. The professor's scales were now showing colors that Jake had never seen before, shifting between red and yellow in a pattern that made him look very concerned. Jake looked out at the stars through the big window and thought about what Professor Zethkar had just said. "Humans are not trying to take over the galaxy, Professor. We are trying to make sure that if something terrible happens, someone will survive to remember what we all built together." Professor Zethkar's scales flickered with colors that Jake interpreted as deep interest, mixed with something that might have been admiration. "Yes, I believe that now. But there is something else I have been thinking about while listening to you today." Jake turned away from the window to face his professor. "What is that, sir?" "In all my years of studying how life develops on different worlds, I have always focused on how species adapt to their environments. I have never considered what happens when the environment itself becomes something that tries to kill everything living in it." Jake nodded thoughtfully. "It is not really an enemy, though. It is more like a very strict teacher, one that does not give second chances to students who do not learn fast enough." The professor made a sound that Jake had learned was the Saurian equivalent of laughter, though it did not sound very happy. "Mr. Morrison, I believe the Galactic Council needs to hear your perspective on these matters. Would you be willing to speak to them directly?" Jake felt something familiar rise up inside him. It was the same feeling that had driven his ancestors when they faced ice ages and volcanic winters and asteroid impacts. It was the moment when humanity faced something new and potentially dangerous, and had to decide whether to back down or move forward into the unknown. "Yes, sir. I think it is very important that they understand what humans really are and what we are trying to do out here." Over the next several days, word of what had happened in Professor Zethkar's class began to spread throughout Kepler-7 station and then to other parts of the galaxy. Jake found himself answering questions from xenobiologists, historians, military strategists, and government officials from dozens of different species. Everyone wanted to understand more about humanity's unique evolutionary history. The questions were always similar. How did humans survive when everything else died? What made them so different from other species? Were they dangerous? Could they be trusted? Were other species really as fragile as Jake had suggested? Jake tried to answer every question honestly, but he could see that his answers often made people uncomfortable. The idea that most galactic species had never faced a real threat to their survival was something that many found hard to accept. Dr. Lisa Park, one of the other humans studying at the university, came to talk to Jake after hearing about what had happened. "Jake, I have been getting strange looks and questions from my engineering classmates ever since word got out about your biology class. They keep asking me if humans are really as tough as you made us sound." Jake sat down with Lisa in the student lounge area, where they could talk without being overheard by too many alien students. "What did you tell them?" "I told them the truth," Lisa said. "That humans have always had to work harder than most species just to stay alive. That we developed technology and exploration not because we wanted to dominate anyone, but because we needed backup plans in case our homeworld became unlivable again." Jake nodded. "How did they react to that?" Lisa looked thoughtful. "Better than I expected, actually. My study partner, a crystalline named Harmony, said it explained why humans always seem to have 3 different solutions for every problem. She said most species are happy when they find one way to do something, but humans always want to know what they will do if that way stops working. Jake realized that Lisa had touched on something important. That is exactly right. Humans do not just solve problems. We solve problems while preparing for the possibility that our solution might not work forever. Over the following weeks, Jake noticed changes in how his alien classmates treated him and the other human students. It was not that they were afraid of humans exactly. It was more like they had developed a new kind of respect mixed with something that might have been relief. Thek explained it to Jake one day after their xenobiology class. Jake, my people have always wondered why humans seemed so worried about things that might never happen. Why do you build so many backup systems? Why do you always have emergency plans? Why do you spread your colonies across so many different worlds instead of just building bigger cities on a few planets? Jake listened carefully to Thek's musical explanation. Now we understand, Thek continued. You are not paranoid or aggressive. You are experienced. You know that bad things can happen because they have happened to you before, many times. Lyra joined their conversation, her glow steady and calm. Jake, I have been thinking about what you said about fragility. I talked to my family on Etheria about it and they said something interesting. What did they say? Jake asked. They said that maybe being fragile is not necessarily bad if you have friends who are strong in different ways. Maybe the galaxy needs species like humans who understand survival. And species like mine who understand beauty and peace. And species like Thek's who understand patience and endurance. Jake felt something warm grow inside him as he realized what Lyra was suggesting. You mean we all have different strengths that could help each other? Exactly, Lyra said, her glow brightening. Your species knows how to survive disasters. Mine knows how to create harmony and beauty. Thek's people know how to be patient and steady. The Zithra are excellent at working together in large groups. The crystallines are amazing at storing and sharing information. Thek's harmonics joined in with a sound that conveyed agreement and excitement. Together we might be much stronger than any of us could be alone. Humans could help us prepare for dangers we have never thought about. And we could help humans build the kind of galaxy worth protecting. Jake looked around at his alien friends and realized that something fundamental had changed in how they all saw each other. Before his answer in biology class, humans had been viewed as the newcomers who did not quite fit in with galactic civilization. Now they were being seen as the ones who could help make sure galactic civilization survived whatever challenges might come in the future. There is something else, Jake said, thinking about conversations he had been having with other humans across the galaxy. Humans have always assumed that we were the weird ones, the ones who did not understand how civilized species were supposed to behave. But maybe we were not supposed to be just another peaceful species. Maybe we were supposed to be the ones who remembered that the universe can be dangerous. Lyra's glow had changed to a deep blue color. That Jake's cultural briefings had told him meant she was thinking very hard about something important. She spoke in a voice that was much quieter than usual. Jake, I need to understand something that is bothering me. On Etheria, we have never experienced anything like what you are describing. Our evolution has been gentle and slow and safe. Thek's musical vibrations joined in, but they were much softer than normal. Same with the Corvin worlds. Our biggest challenge has always been dealing with changes in weather between seasons. Jake looked around the room and saw something in his alien classmates that he had never expected to see. It was not anger or dislike. It was fear, but not the kind of fear where someone is afraid of getting hurt. It was the kind of fear that comes when someone realizes they do not understand something as well as they thought they did. Professor Zethkar had moved to stand next to Jake at the front of the class. His scales had changed to a blue-green color that Jake had learned meant deep thinking. Class, I believe we are seeing something that has never happened before in our understanding of how life develops across the galaxy. Please continue, Mr. Morrison. Help us understand what all of this means. Jake felt the weight of everyone's attention focused on him. It was not a comfortable feeling, but he knew he had to help them understand. The thing is, this pattern did not stop with our ancient ancestors. Humans have continued to face events that could have wiped us out completely throughout our entire history as a species. He changed the display to show a timeline of human history with markers for major disasters. About 74,000 years ago, a supervolcano called Toba erupted and nearly ended the human species before we had spread very far across Earth. The ash and smoke blocked out the sun for years and made the whole planet cold. Scientists think the total human population might have dropped to as few as 3,000 to 10,000 people. Zrix, the Jithra student, made clicking sounds that the translator turned into a very worried voice. Your entire species almost died completely? How do you live with knowing something like that? Jake shrugged, which was a human gesture that did not mean much to most of his classmates. It is just part of being human. We do not really think about it most of the time because it happened so long ago, but it explains a lot about how we approach problems and challenges. He brought up more information about human behavior and psychology. When humans encounter something that seems impossible to solve, our first instinct is not to give up or run away. Our first instinct is to figure out how to survive it and maybe even use it to make ourselves stronger. Thax. Harmonics carried a sound that Jake was starting to recognize as a kind of understanding or realization. This is why humans seem so intense about everything. Your space program, your technology development, your efforts to build colonies on other worlds. You approach everything like it is a matter of life and death. Because for us it usually is, Jake confirmed. We did not develop faster than light travel because we were curious about exploring the galaxy, though we are curious. We developed it because we knew that eventually, Earth would face another extinction event, and we wanted to make sure that some humans would survive somewhere else when that happened. The classroom became quiet again, but this was a different kind of quiet than before. There was respect in it and something else that Jake could not quite identify. It felt like his classmates were seeing him as a different kind of being than they had before. Professor Zethkar's scales had changed to a deep purple color that Jake had never seen before. Mr. Morrison, I need to ask you something very important, and I want you to be completely honest with me and the class. When humans look at other species in the galaxy, when you look at us, what do you see? Jake hesitated because he knew his answer might upset some of his classmates. But the professor had asked for complete honesty, and Jake had always tried to be truthful in his classes. We see people who have never had to fight for their survival the way we have. Your species, all of your species, developed on worlds that were kind to you and never tried to kill you. You have never had to choose between changing everything about how you live or dying completely. He paused and looked around the room at all the different alien faces watching him. And honestly, sometimes we wonder if that makes you fragile in ways that you do not realize. The word fragile seemed to hang in the air like something physical that everyone could see and touch. Jake could feel the impact it had on his classmates, and he wished he could take it back or say it in a gentler way. Lyra was the first one to respond, and her voice was very soft. Are we fragile, Jake? Are we weak? Jake shook his head quickly. I do not know if you are or not. Humans hope that you never have to find out. But yes, from our perspective, most galactic species seem like they might have trouble handling big changes or disasters. Professor Zethkar walked over to the large window that looked out into space, where they could see stars and other ships moving around the station. Mr. Morrison, there is something I must tell you that goes beyond today's lesson. Jake followed him to the window, and most of the class turned to watch them. Yes, sir? I have been teaching xenobiology for 47 standard years. I have had students from over 200 different species in my classes. Today is the first time I have ever encountered a species that was shaped by surviving disasters. The professor's scales shifted to what Jake had learned was their version of a smile. Do you understand what this means for how the galaxy sees humanity? Jake looked out at the stars and thought about all the human colonies that were being built on different worlds. All the human ships exploring new systems. All the human scientists and engineers working on projects across the galaxy. I think I am starting to understand. The Galactic Council has been puzzled by humans since we first made contact with your species. Your rapid development of technology, your need to explore and build new settlements, your unusual ways of solving problems. Many species have viewed these traits as aggressive or even dangerous. Jake nodded slowly. And now? Professor Zethkar's scales showed the pattern that meant he was pleased about something. Now I think we understand that you are not aggressive at all. You are prepared. There is a very important difference between those two things. Professor Zethkar's scales kept changing colors in ways Jake had never seen before. The patterns moved across his skin like waves, showing that the professor was feeling many strong emotions at once. Thousands? He asked, and his voice sounded like he could not believe what Jake had just said. Surely you're making that number bigger than it really is. Jake pulled out his personal datapad and started looking through his files. He had brought many records from Earth because he never knew when they might be useful for his studies. Not at all, sir. I can prove it. He found the file he wanted and held up his device so everyone could see the information. Just from the most recent big extinction event that happened about 66 million years ago, we lost all the large dinosaurs, many sea creatures with shells, giant swimming reptiles, and about 75% of all species that lived on Earth at that time. The bug-like Zithra students behind him started making rapid clicking sounds that got louder and more frantic. One of them, whose name was Zrix, managed to speak through the translation system in a voice that sounded very upset. 75%? How did anything live through that? How are you here talking to us right now? Jake turned around to look at Zrix and the other Shithra students. Their big compound eyes were staring at him in a way that made him feel like they thought he was some kind of impossible creature. It was really hard, but life always finds a way to keep going. The animals that survived were mostly small ones that could dig underground and hide. They ate things like seeds and bugs and dead plants. Birds survived because they were already good at living in different places and eating different foods. Lyra, the glowing blue student next to him, spoke up in a voice that was much quieter than usual. Wait, Jake. Are you telling us that your ancestors lived through a disaster that killed 3 out of every 4 living things on your entire planet? Yes, Jake said, starting to realize that his classmates were much more upset by this information than he had expected. But that was not even the worst one that happened to Earth. The crystal student named Quartz made a sound like metal bells ringing in alarm. Not the worst one? There were others? Jake nodded and brought up more information on his data pad. The worst one we know about happened about 252 million years ago. We call it the Great Dying because it killed about 96% of everything that lived in the oceans and 70% of everything that lived on land. Professor Zethkar had moved closer to Jake's desk, and his scales were now completely red, which Jake's training materials had told him meant extreme alarm or fear. Mr. Morrison, are you telling this entire class that your planet has survived multiple disasters that killed almost everything alive? And yet here you are, healthy and strong, talking to us like this is normal? Here we are, Jake confirmed, spreading his hands out in a gesture that was meant to show that he was just stating facts. Humans actually came into existence after all these big extinctions happened. We are basically the children and grandchildren of the survivors who lived through disaster after disaster after disaster. The room exploded with noise as every species started talking at once in their own languages. Lyra's glow started flashing between different colors so fast it made Jake's eyes hurt. Thek's musical vibrations became so deep and powerful that Jake could feel them in his chest and bones. The Zithra students' clicking became so loud and fast that it sounded like hundreds of tiny machines all breaking at the same time. Other students that Jake had never heard speak before were now making sounds of distress and confusion. The crystal beings were ringing like alarm bells. Some flying creatures that looked like colorful feathered snakes were making high-pitched calls that the translator could not turn into words. Even the plant-like students who usually stayed very quiet were rustling their leaves in agitation. Silence. Professor Zethkar's voice boomed through the room, made even louder by the sound system. His scales had settled into a pattern of red and yellow stripes that Jake had never seen before and did not know how to interpret. Mr. Morrison, please continue. I need you to explain to all of us how your species and your planet's life survived these events. Jake stood up because he felt like this had become much bigger than just answering a simple question in biology class. He walked to the front of the room as the professor gestured for him to come forward. All the eyes, sensors, and other vision organs of his classmates followed him as he moved. Well, the thing about extinction events is that they do not kill absolutely everything, Jake began, activating the main holographic display system that could show information to the entire class. They create new challenges that force life to change and adapt, and they also create new opportunities when the old dominant species are gone. He started pulling up images from Earth's history that showed the different time periods and the creatures that lived during them. After the dinosaurs died out, mammals were able to spread out and become many different types of creatures that filled the empty spaces in nature, where the dinosaurs used to live. Jake looked around the room at his classmates and saw something in their faces and body language that he had never seen before. It was not just surprise or curiosity. It looked like fear, but not fear of him exactly. It was more like they were afraid of what he represented or what his very existence meant. Here is something that might be hard for all of you to understand, Jake continued, bringing up more detailed information about Earth's history of disasters. These extinction events did not just happen to us and then we survived them. They actually created us. Every major disaster eliminated the species that had been dominant before and gave chances for new types of life to develop and grow. Quartz made another ringing sound, but this time it was softer and sounded more sad than alarmed. But how does any living thing survive when everything around it is dying? Jake smiled, though he could see that his expression did not translate well to most of his alien classmates. By being really, really good at not dying, he said. The ancestors of humans and many other Earth species survived ice ages that lasted thousands of years, volcanic eruptions that blocked out the sun for decades, rocks from space that hit our planet like bombs, and changes in climate that would kill most life forms. He paused and looked directly at several of his classmates. We learned to eat almost anything, live almost anywhere, and change our behavior to survive conditions that would be impossible for most other species to handle. 3 weeks after the biology class that changed everything, Jake found himself standing in the main assembly hall of Kepler 7 station, looking out at representatives from 47 different worlds. The Galactic Council had asked him to speak about humanity's place in the galaxy, and Jake felt the weight of representing his entire species. Professor Zethkar had helped him prepare for this moment, but Jake knew that what he said today could change how the galaxy viewed humans for generations to come. He thought about his ancestors who had crawled out of volcanic ash and ice age caves, who had looked up at the stars and decided that giving up was not an option. Honored representatives, Jake began, his voice carrying clearly through the translation systems that would turn his words into sounds and concepts that every species could understand. I am here to tell you about a species that learned to survive catastrophe, not because we wanted to, but because we had to. He paused and looked around at the assembled beings. There were tall, graceful Etherians like his classmate Lyra, massive rock-like Corvins like Thek, insectoid Zithra with their compound eyes reflecting light like jewels, crystalline beings that sang when they moved, and dozens of other species he was still learning about. When Professor Zethkar asked his class to name an extinct species, I realized that humans have a very different relationship with extinction than most of you do. For us, extinction is not an abstract concept or something that happened to other creatures long ago. It is something that has been chasing our lineage for hundreds of millions of years. Jake activated the holographic display system and showed images of Earth's long history of disasters. Every major extinction event that should have ended our evolutionary line instead made it stronger. The ancestors of humans survived because they were adaptable, resourceful, and absolutely determined not to die. A representative from the Etherian worlds, an elegant being whose skin glowed with patterns Jake did not recognize, asked the first question. Young human, are you saying that your species views the galaxy as a dangerous place that might try to destroy us all? Jake shook his head. No, honored representative. We view the galaxy as a beautiful and amazing place that we want to help preserve forever. But we also know that beautiful things can be fragile, and we want to make sure that the civilization we are all building together can survive whatever challenges might come. A Corvin representative, whose harmonic voice resonated through the chamber like deep music, spoke next. What kinds of challenges are you prepared for that the rest of us are not? Jake brought up more data on the display. Asteroid impacts that could destroy entire worlds, supervolcanic eruptions that could change the climate of whole star systems, gamma-ray bursts from dying stars that could sterilize planets, solar flares that could knock out all electronic systems, ice ages caused by changes in stellar output, pandemic diseases that could spread across trade routes. As Jake listed each potential disaster, he could see the representatives exchanging glances and making the gestures their species used to show concern or alarm. Many of these possibilities had clearly never occurred to them before. But here is what I want you to understand, Jake continued, his voice growing stronger. Humans are not telling you about these dangers because we want to scare you, or because we think disaster is inevitable. We are telling you because we want to help you prepare for possibilities that most species never have to think about. A crystalline representative chimed in with a sound like wind through crystal formations. What would this preparation look like? Jake smiled, and he could see that some of the representatives were beginning to understand his expression as a positive gesture. It would look like the kind of galaxy we are all building together. but with some additional safeguards. Backup colonies on multiple worlds in case something happens to home planets. Distributed technology networks that can keep working even if some parts are damaged. Emergency response systems that can help entire populations evacuate if necessary. Seed banks and genetic libraries to preserve life forms, even if their original habitats are destroyed. The Etherean. Representative's glow shifted to colors that Jake had learned indicated thoughtful consideration. You are proposing that humans serve as the guardians against catastrophe for galactic civilization? Not exactly, Jake replied. We are proposing that humans work with all of you to make sure galactic civilization can survive catastrophe. We do not want to be in charge of anything. We just want to contribute the skills and knowledge that our unique evolutionary history has given us. A new voice joined the discussion, belonging to a species Jake had never met before. They looked like living trees with mobile branches and leaves that rustled when they spoke. Young human. Many of our species have worried that humans are too aggressive, too quick to expand and colonize new worlds. How do we know that your preparations for survival will not become preparations for domination? Jake had expected this question and he was ready with an answer. Because everything we do, we want to do together with you. Humans do not want to dominate the galaxy. We want to make sure the galaxy survives. There is a big difference. He changed the display to show images of human colonies and projects across known space. Look at what humans have actually been building. Research stations that are open to scientists from all species. Medical facilities that treat anyone who needs help. Agricultural projects that develop food sources for different biological needs. Defense systems that protect trade routes used by everyone. Jake paused and looked directly at several of the representatives. Humans learned long ago that the best way to survive is to make sure your friends and allies survive too. We are not trying to replace anyone or take over anything. We are trying to build a galaxy that can last forever, with places for everyone. The chamber was quiet for several minutes as the representatives processed what Jake had said. Finally, the Corvin representative spoke in harmonics that conveyed deep respect. Young human, your species offers something that the rest of us lack. Experience with surviving the impossible. Perhaps it is time for the Galactic Council to formally recognize this contribution. Over the following months, Jake watched as relationships between humans and other galactic species began to change throughout known space. Humans were no longer seen as aggressive newcomers who did not understand civilized behavior. Instead, they were increasingly viewed as the specialists in survival, the ones who could help everyone prepare for challenges that might never come, but could be catastrophic if they did. Dr. Lisa Park sent Jake a message from her engineering project. They have stopped seeing us as reckless risk-takers who always want to do dangerous things. Now they see us as the crew that stays behind to make sure the ship does not sink while everyone else gets to safety. It is a different kind of respect and it feels better. Jake found himself thinking about that message as he prepared for his final exams at the university. Humans had spent so much energy trying to prove they belonged in the galactic community. But maybe what the galaxy actually needed was not another species that fit in perfectly with everyone else. Maybe what it needed was a species that specialized in making sure everyone else could keep fitting in together, no matter what the universe threw at them. Standing in Professor Zethkar's classroom one last time before graduation, Jake looked around at his alien classmates who had become friends and partners in learning. They no longer looked at him like he was strange or dangerous. They looked at him like he was the person they would want on their team if everything went wrong and they needed someone who knew how to fix it. The future, Jake realized, was going to be very interesting indeed. And for the first time in human history, his species would not be facing that future alone.